Good morning and welcome. My name is Beatriz Junco Gonzalez. I'm the Corporate Communications and Corporate Responsibility Manager at Mercantil Commerce Bank. And as always, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our 2012-2013 Leadership Lecture Series. Today, our fourth edition and rounding out the year with a very special speaker, Mary Uhl-Bien from the University of Nebraska. We have had a great series. The team here at FIU, Dr. Maydig, everyone has just gone out of their way to make create such a great program for everyone. And we are so honored to have been the sponsor and the partner in this case. It's part of our commitment to the community. And we've done that for 30 years. So we're looking forward to many more in the future. But as always, it is also my pleasure to introduce to you a very special person to all of us, Dr. Maydig, Executive Director of the Center and President Emeritus of FIU. What a wonderful institution we have. Because of him and in his tenure, we have an architectural school, a law school, a medical school, engineering school, and everything that we know FIU to be. And so I am very proud to now turn it over to Dr. Maydig. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those of you that were here the last time remember listening to Jerry Cahill, and he very proudly said that he was not polished, that he was not smooth, that he didn't think a lot about leadership, that he hadn't studied leadership, he just did what came naturally. He's kind of proud that he didn't think about leadership. Well, today we have someone who's proud that she does think, about leadership. So it's a different spin. Before I introduce her, I want to thank Mercantil Commerce Bank for sponsoring this wonderful lecture series. We couldn't do it without you, and we appreciate your support. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to recognize I'm sure many of you would like to know what a legend looks like, a living legend. We have a living legend here with us. There's a game that we play in Miami, and the game is, what is it that Merritt Sturheim has not been? And you say, okay, he wasn't city manager of Miami. No, wrong. He was city manager of Miami. Okay, he wasn't superintendent of public schools. No, wrong. He was superintendent of public schools. Okay, maybe he wasn't county manager. No, he was county manager. No, he wasn't in charge of the Lipton. Yes, he was in charge of the Lipton. And I'm just mentioning a few of it's an interesting game. I'm sure if you play it long enough, you'll find, for instance, he was not city manager of Hialeah. That we know for a fact. So if you want to know what a living legend looks like, Merritt, would you just stand and be recognized, please?
At least two living legends, because you're looking at one right here.
Merritt, I'm too young to be a living legend. We also have a legend in his own program. We recently had our Leading Decisions, which is a program we have for CEOs, for chief executives. And normally we have 16 of them or something like that. And we say, who is the one who helped you the most? And they all vote for themselves, so we get 16 votes of one, okay, because they all think they're terrific. But this year, it was different. This year, they almost all agreed. The majority of them voted for one person who was the spark, who was the catalyst to their learning. And we have the president, of Banco Vizcaíno de Vizcaya Compass, Roberto Munoz, here with us. So, Roberto. And, he would be a tribute to Woody Allen. I don't know if you know what Woody Allen said about success. Anybody remember that? Woody Allen says half of success is showing up. And at 3 o'clock in the morning today, I got an email, from Roberto, and he's here, probably an hour before everybody else. So he is there. He is solid. And we also are proud that we have our partner in crime here, Commissioner Katie Sorensen, who is sharing what the Miami summits have morphed into, which is Engage Miami. We're going to get Miami engaged, Katie and I. Katie, great. I'm a moderately conservative Republican, Cuban-American male, and I thought it'd be perfect to have a liberal, left-wing, Norwegian or Norwegian, Swedish Democrat working along with me. So we're working along together greatly. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you Mary Uhl-Bien. Just think of Yuletide, and you'll be able to pronounce her name, well. She is currently the professor and Howard Hawks Chair in Business Ethics and Leadership at the University of Nebraska, and program chair of the Organizational Behavior Division of the Academy of Management. The Academy of Management is the great center of academic exchange in the world, of organizations. She has traveled around the world as a visiting scholar. She's been in Sweden, she's been in Spain, Portugal, Australia. I don't know exactly what those have in common, but I'm sure we'll figure that out. She studies what Merritt did, and that is complexity leadership. And I'm not going to steal any thunder from him, but the idea, the traditional idea of a leader is there's a king, there is a prime minister, there is a president, there's a military dictator, and then that person fans out and says, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do that. And complexity leadership theory is quite different. Complexity leadership theory says, most of the time it doesn't happen like that, even in a dictatorial regime. It's not the one leading the many, it's the many leading the many. How many things, for instance, do we have that you in your leadership position, even though there is someone else that you report to, actually undertake, on your own? For instance, Vice President Hardwick is here. How many things haven't you done that you did on your own? So you're part of the many leading the many. It's not just one person, calling, all the shots, although that's a model that we have in our mind. See, we like to tell stories, and the stories are a lot simpler if you say, Mitch Meadike did this and this and this and this. No. It's Mitch Meadike and Mark Rosenberg and Ron Berkman and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a big picture. Now, that's a very simplified view of what she has won Best Paper awards in this area and in other area. She has served on one of the things that academicians respect the most is service on an editorial board. She's served on the editorial board of the Academy of Management Journal, the Academy of Management Review, the Leadership Quarterly. And she is also, very significantly for us, a co-founder of the Network of Leadership Scholars. This is a group that interconnects all of us who are studying leadership. And working together, with Professor Uhl-Bien, we developed an award that our center sponsors for the most outstanding thesis, in the... Hey, Dean, Alex Acosta.
Hello.
He lent us this room. Thank you very much, Dean.
Anytime.
Appreciate it. Thanks to the law school. I guess you weren't impressed. She is also the organizer of the National Leadership Scholars Annual Research Practice Conference. So she is one of the major leadership scholars, in the country, and we are very proud that she is with us today. Mary?
Thank you so much. Thank you. I actually wish you could introduce me every time I talk, because that was a wonderful introduction, and you set up the complexity idea very well. Thank you. So what I want to tell you is that this is going to be very different. And you're going to leave feeling lots of different kinds of feelings. Some of you will be energized and engaged and excited. Some of you are going to be frustrated as can be. And you're going to say, I don't like that. I can't stand that way of thinking. So it depends on the audience in the group. I did a sales group a couple of years ago, and the guy who invited me had been working with me very closely. He said it was about 50-50, the ones that liked and the ones that didn't. And they had a conversation about it. And what they realized was that they brought in too many people that told them things that they wanted to hear and made them feel good, and that they felt that they needed to get more used to being pushed, to be challenged to think differently. So I'm just going to start by giving you that warning sign. There's a warning label at the start of the talk. The other warning is this. They're trying to talk about complexity in a short time isn't easy. It really suits better for a half-day workshop. So there are trade-offs that I have to make in presenting it to you. If I skip the part of what is complexity, you're not going to get the second part. But spending the time on what is complexity is going to leave you feeling like there isn't enough delivered in the second part. So I'm going to do the best I can. I put slides together, and I weeded them out and tried to pick the right mix. I don't know. I'm not confident that I have it, but if I give you a warning sign up front and let you know the challenge of it, hopefully that will help you to understand it better. So thank you, Betty and Mercantile Bank, for sponsoring this. It's wonderful. Not many places get the opportunity to have speakers come in at the level and the amount of time that you're able to do here, so that's really impressive. And thank you, Dr. Madiq, for inviting me, and FIU for sponsoring the Dissertation Award for the Network of Leadership Scholars. We were extremely excited to have that happen, and it's a huge step forward for us. Okay, so let's start. We're going to talk today about complexity leadership. This is a research program that I started in 2001. And I want to tell you just a little bit about the motivation for the research program and the journey that led up to that. So I started in this profession studying what's called leader-member exchange theory. Leader-member exchange theory studies the relationship between managers and subordinates. And what it says is, if you have a better quality relationship between a manager and a subordinate, characterized by trust, respect, and loyalty, then you're going to get positive outcomes in the workplace. And the person who invited me into the doctoral program and was my advisor had started that theory. He was retiring. This is the late 1990s. He was starting to look into the future. It was an Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of thing. He said, I bless you. You have leader-member exchange theory. It's yours. You can take it. And he was very excited. I, at that time, had just been asked to be a consultant for a corporation. And I also was starting to teach executive ed. And in teaching executive ed and in doing the consulting work, what I found was that I couldn't use leadership research. Leadership research was tremendously limited, including my own theory that I was working on. And so as I began working with executives and teaching in the classroom, and even with teaching undergrads, I'm a leadership person. I skipped the leadership chapters. I never taught from them. So I knew I had a problem. And what I had to do was teach myself a different way of thinking about leadership. So I used Harvard Business Review, a great resource, and read a lot of the popular press. And that's how I learned about leadership. But at that point, what happened was I became a schizophrenic. So in the classroom, I'm teaching one thing. In my research life, I'm doing something else. In my research life, I'm gaining incredible fame for leader-member exchange theory. I have the opportunity to take that and be set for the future. But I didn't like being a schizophrenic. And when I worked with the executive, I went out and I tried to tell him, well, this is what you need to do according to the theory. So I'll never forget this. He and I had lunch. And I told him, well, you need to go out and be relational. So that was at noon. I went out and I met with all of his vice presidents that afternoon. At the end of the day, Judy, his secretary, says, Mary, Mr. Smith would like to see you in his office. And it's one of those things, oh no, I'm fired already. So I walked into his office. He said, look at what I'm doing. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing email. I said, yeah? He said, I've been out in the offices all afternoon talking to people. He said, I've talked about the Super Bowl. I've talked about kids, the babies and the birthdays. He said, I did everything you told me to do. I was very relational. I said, yay, this is great. So how long do you think that lasted? That day. The next time I met with him, we talked again, and he said, that's just not going to work. So we began this engagement and this conversation around what his job was. And I said, you're right, that's not your job. Because if that is your job, just to be relational and build relationships, you're creating a dependency on you for how everybody in the offices feel. So I was poised at that time to try to figure out something different, and I was introduced to this idea of complexity. And I was given the book by my co-author, Russ Marion. It was called The Edge of Organization. I lived in Florida at the time, and it was summertime, and Jerry Hunt, the editor of Leadership Quarterly, said to me, Mary, here's this guy, Russ, and I want you to write a paper with him on complexity. And he said, this is June, and this is 2001. He said, I want you to turn it in September. So I looked at Jerry and I said, I don't know anything about complexity. He said, that's okay. He says, Russ, give her your book. So he says, here's the book, go read it, write the paper. I knew Jerry, and I knew Jerry had best interests in mind. So this is one of those testing opportunities. You know, it's an opportunity if you recognize it. I thought, I'm taking it. So I put aside everything else, and I took the book, and I was in Florida. I lived in Orlando at the time, so I remember this very well. If I'm gonna work, at least I'm gonna float on my pool doing it. So I'm floating on my pool reading this complexity book, and my brain is going crazy. Absolutely crazy. And I'm looking out to the environment because this is all about physical systems and how physical systems work. It's about biology and physics and ants and bees and boiling water and all of these things. It even gets into God and teleology and philosophy. So it was a very deep kind of thing. But as I'm reading this book, I'm thinking, this is what I've been looking for. This is the answer. This helps me to address the challenges that I've been seeing. So what complexity does is it helps us to view the world from the standpoint of interactions. And I was a relational person, so I recognized the idea of interactions. Interactions and interdependence. At its core, it's about connections. And so it moves us away from the world of just the individual. And I have up here the problems with leadership research and current leadership approaches. They're too focused on the individual. And in fact, when we're teaching leadership, what are we teaching? We're teaching leaders. And we're teaching self-awareness. Okay, that's all fine. I don't knock that, but it's not enough. It doesn't get at the rich complexity and the contextual aspect of what leaders deal with. Leaders don't deal with only motivating other individuals. What they deal with is interacting with complex dynamics. So complexity leadership then is about this idea of how do we engage with a complex interactive dynamic rather than just a person. That person brings history, there's context, we can't necessarily control. And yet all of our theories reduce it down to an individual absent context. And most of you are not researchers. If we were doing a research talk, I would be bashing the research because what we've shown in the research is the same thing over and over again. It's what I call a feel-good effect, and our measures are tapping into a halo effect of individuals. All of our measures are highly intercorrelated. So we can say we have different theories, but we really don't. I mean, we have rich theories. Our methods are not allowing us to tap into the richness of the theories. So I didn't want to spend my life doing that. And I knew I had a long career ahead of me. So I picked off a wicked problem. So you're going to see the result of a wicked problem being addressed. And then a realization that we needed a new set of paradigmatic assumptions. My doctoral dissertation was on self-management. So I wrote in the early 90s, self-management, empowerment were the big things. I used Peter Drucker's The Coming of the Knowledge Worker, and I was so excited. And I was really into the empowerment movement. But the empowerment movement somewhat was a dud. It fizzled. And we could never quite get it to work. And what I realized was because the empowerment movement was grounded in a hierarchical model, what it did was it caused us to pull back to accountability. So in a hierarchical model, we pull back to accountability. And managers get very uncomfortable with empowering because they're responsible still. And so there's this fundamental contradiction in the idea of empowerment versus accountability. So I knew we needed a different paradigmatic assumption. All right, so that got me to complexity. Complexity offers that different paradigmatic assumption. And this is my one-slide version of what is complexity. I will tell you that they say that genius is taking something complex and making it simple, and I always keep that in mind. Most people can't explain complexity. It's a huge field. There's so much involved. There's so many different twists and angles. So this is my attempt to get across to you what you need to know about complexity. Complexity is the study of rich interconnectivity. So if I have to describe it in 2 words, rich interconnectivity. And what that means is that complexity is about how things interconnect to generate something different. By rich, it means that when things come together, they have an effect, an interaction effect, not a statistical interaction, but an interaction effect that creates what we call a phase transition. So it produces something fundamentally different. Complexity is different from complicated. A jumbo jet is complicated. Paul Cilliers wrote this, and I just thought it was wonderful. So a jumbo jet is complicated. With a jumbo jet, you have a lot of parts. You add the part. When you attach the part to the jet, does it change the rest of the jet? It makes it bigger, but it doesn't fundamentally change it. It doesn't transform the other pieces. In complexity, mayonnaise is a good example. So you bring these ingredients together, and when you mix them, they create a phase transition to something very different. It's not decomposable back to its original parts. That's the idea of rich interconnectivity. So it's in the interaction, it sparks a phase transition that the components are fundamentally changed. They're not decomposable back. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of that. But before I give you some examples, I have to explain the emergence process. So what I think a lot of people have missed in explaining complexity is the importance of emergence. And to me, this is what it really has to offer for us in management and in business. So complexity talks about emergence, and emergence is this unfolding process. It's a linking up process. In complexity, we talk about agents. And here's something else I loved about it. When they talk about agents in complexity, it's not just a person. It's anything. It can be an idea. It can be a worldview. It can be a technology. It can be a resource. So it gets us out of only having to think about people in leadership. People are important. But by studying only people, we're missing all of these other things that play into what happens in leadership. So agents are anything like a resource, an idea, a person, all right? And in emergence, what happens is you have agents, and they begin to bond. Now, I'm going to use the example of the Egyptian revolution. I'm a geek. I think a lot about the world and things that are happening. And when I see examples that bring to life the theory I'm working on, I get really excited. So for me, the Egyptian revolution was one of these events. Every night I would go home. We have PBS news hours on at 9 o'clock. I would tune in the news hour at 9 to see what happened that day with the revolution. And I would watch the unfolding story. And I'm so excited because it was like a living soap opera. It was better than a soap opera because there was so much drama. You didn't know what was going to happen. So I remember the night before the revolution, it was reaching a peak. And it was a question of what's going to happen. Are they going to be massacred in the square? Or are they going to be successful in this? So I can tell you that it happened, I don't remember the exact date, but it was a Friday when the president stepped down and they had succeeded. And it was Friday around 11 or 12 in the afternoon for us in Nebraska. And CNN was there and they were reporting. And so I'm watching this going, wow, this is amazing. It's an emergence event. So I'm going to use this revolution to describe to you complexity, okay? So we're going to overly simplify this. There are so many other pieces, but we don't have time. We could spend an hour just on this. Let's just say I'm going to take the people. It's unhappy Egyptians. These are the agents. So people out there are unhappy. They begin to bond. So some of them start to identify that they have a common need, a common interest. And as they begin to bond, now you get groups. And you start to get groups. And those groups are aggregates. So you begin to get aggregates. The aggregates link up with other aggregates to form meta-aggregates. This is an emergence process. This is a linking up process. And then at some point in the process, it doesn't form a meta-aggregate. Instead, it creates a phase transition. And a phase transition is when it takes on a new form. So we start with unhappy Egyptians. We get to Egyptian rebels in the little groups. And then we get them all in the square, and gosh, there's so many things about this that are exciting I can't tell you about, but they get to the square and all of a sudden now we have an Egyptian revolution. And it seems to happen like that. It gets named as an Egyptian revolution. That's an emergence process. These emergence processes are happening around us all the time. And the important thing about the emergence processes is that they can't be controlled. They're not controllable. So what complexity helps us to understand is that many things we're dealing with in leadership and management and organizations and life are uncontrollable. That doesn't mean everything is uncontrollable. Clearly, we still have control. But if we use models that are grounded in assumptions of control and of hierarchy, they're not going to be able to help us understand situations like this. So this offers us a new lens to see things in different ways. Now, here's what was interesting. Anderson Cooper is in Egypt. It's Friday. Mubarak has stepped down, and he gets hold of the Google guy. I don't know if you remember the Google guy. His name is Wael Ghonim. So he gets Wael Ghonim, and he says, here's the leader of the Egyptian revolution. Does anybody remember what Ghonim said? Here's what he said, many times. The Western media like to put me up as the face of the revolution, but I don't feel that way. Some people appreciate what I've done, but the revolution was literally without a leader. This is the important message. This is what we need to understand. There's a great Tolstoy quote talking about the French Revolution was the result of actions and marches of millions of people all over France over a time period with all kinds of things happening, but it gets boiled down to a story of a few people in an office in Paris and one man. And that's the story we tell. So Wael Ghonim said, I'm not doing that. And in fact, during their whole movement, they were very, very intentional about not having a leader. So the idea here is, and he says without a leader, I would say with lots of leaders. I wouldn't say it's without a leader. I would say it's very leaderful. It has lots and lots of leadership going on. All right, so this is the idea that of emergence and how emergence can help us think about things differently. I'll give you a couple of other obvious big examples. One is the economic crisis, the global economic crisis. Perfect example of emergence. Now, that year I was watching the news. In February or March, there were a couple of people who were saying, we are in for a big depression. They said it's going to be like the depression of the 1920s. This is February, March of the year when we know everything kind of hit in the fall. So people were beginning to see it in the short term. Others were looking at them going, you're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. But that was a linking up process. And it seemed to happen like that, right? Bear Stearns happened. All of this, when it hit, was a quick phase transition. But the pieces of it were all out there. And I know we have plenty of people in the room who could tell us, you have expertise to tell us the components that linked up. But it was a linking up process. Now, after the global economic crisis happens, Henry Paulson's the Secretary of the Treasury. He's the leader, right? Everybody looks to him, you're the leader, do something. Do our leadership theories tell Henry Paulson what he should do? Is there any explanation anywhere in our leadership theories for Hank Paulson saying, here's your situation, you're the leader? Does he have a vision? And he goes out and gets everybody to align around his vision? And he drives it? No. So what happens? This is a situation that we've been writing about in the theory, the complex interactive dynamic. He has a global economic crisis. And now he's got the economy and everything else. He has to interact as the leader with a complex dynamic. What do they do? What are the major things they do?
Gathering consensus.
Okay, they try to bring people together to figure out what to do. But there was a major action they took. What was it?
They issued the bailout.
Bailouts and stimulus money.
Right.
Stimulus money. Stimulus money is an attempt to interact with a complex dynamic. So you can't control a complex dynamic, but what you can try to do is influence it. You can try, if you understand it, you can try to influence it to go in certain directions. So the idea of the stimulus money was let's influence this dynamic. And it essentially worked in some ways, right? Okay, but a very different kind of understanding of leadership and what leaders do from the traditional models. Al-Qaeda. Russ and I wrote our first paper on complexity. We turned it in on September 10th, 2001. Now, it so happened that September 11th was a Tuesday. The Thursday and Friday before September 11th, Russ, Mary, and my colleague who writes on complexity had been invited with other complexity scholars, Bill McKelvey, my other co-author, and some other people, to the Pentagon. And they were there for 2 days, Thursday and Friday, before September 11th on Tuesday. And when Russ gets back on Friday, he calls me. I said, how'd it go? He said, you won't believe this. This was incredible. He said, they ran us through a simulation. The simulation was, what if there was a terrorist attack on the United States? How would complexity explain it? So they had the leading complexity scholars in the world in that room having a conversation about how complexity would explain a terrorist attack. And here we are, Tuesday, the terrorist attack happens. The only good thing for me, well, I won't say only, the good thing for me was at least I understood that they got the complexity piece, so I knew they understood that. But if you recall, after September 11th, do you remember the deck of cards? Okay, what is the deck of cards? The deck of cards is the leaders they have to kill, and that's supposed to stop the movement. Does that stop the movement? That's traditional thinking, isn't it? It's traditional thinking that if we get these leaders, then this is going to take care of the problem and Al-Qaeda will be wiped out because they're the head of the organization and this will destroy it. Now, I will tell you from my own belief, and I can't confirm this, but I have enough information that I believe this very strongly. I believe that was a PR move. I believe that they knew that that's not what they had to do, but they had to calm the American public. So what they did is they used a story and a traditional approach to leadership to make people feel more comfortable, like they were in charge and in control. But what did they really do? They went after the information. They went after the money. So behind the scenes, they're taking a complexity approach to address the issue of Al-Qaeda because they knew what is involved with that. All right, so Al-Qaeda is not an organization, it's a terrorist network. We wrote a paper on this. It was the result of cells linking up. At one point in those linking up processes, they took on the name Al-Qaeda. Prior to that, they had a lot of different other names, so those were the aggregates that link up and form a phase transition. Osama bin Laden did not create Al-Qaeda. He emerged from it. He emerged in the movement that created Al-Qaeda. And the reason he was held up as the leader was because he had resources. We take Osama bin Laden out, it doesn't affect Al-Qaeda. Okay, so this all gives you an understanding of how we need to view the world differently and how complexity can help us bring a different set of assumptions. We are in the age of complexity. When we started this work in 2001, we saw it, we figured it would take off. We saw pieces out there, and we began to understand was those pieces of complexity were everywhere. So people all over the place in many, many different fields are talking about this. And we knew from the understanding of linking up that if these things could link up, that this would go. So we made the decision to invest in it. And I have to decide, my career rides on this. Is this worth the risk? Just like entrepreneurs who see opportunities out there. So in 2011, September, Harvard Business Review came out with a cover story, Embracing Complexity. So that showed us that they're starting to get it, that the business world is beginning to understand this. But here's the one that was more powerful and exciting for us, and where I would say I really think it tipped. If there's a tipping point that tells us that things are different, this is the IBM report. So IBM does biannual surveys of CEOs. And this is the result of their 2010 CEO survey, 1,541 CEOs and executives around the world. The number one issue they identified was complexity. So when they said that, I immediately look in it to see, is it our complexity? Do they really get it? Or are they using it to mean complicated? So when I opened it up and I read the executive summary, what they said was, we are in a global system of systems. The world is interconnected on an unprecedented level. And this is creating situations where we can't control. We no longer can control what happens in our own organizations. Now, here's what was interesting. The executive said, and if you think about it, this happened right after the economic crisis. This is the first survey after the economic crisis. That's what caused this. I'm certain of it, because prior to that, they were talking about leading change. And they were still on the more traditional vision-led, top-down idea of leading change. So the executive said, not only is complexity the major problem, we expect it to increase. It will only increase. And over 50%, and I would say the number is much higher, because if it's only 50%, I'm sure there are a lot more. Over 50% said they had no idea what to do about it. All right, so here is real evidence that we are in a situation where our leadership models are out of line with the world of what leaders are dealing with. We need to think differently. It's creating dramatic pressures on industries, complexity. So if you talk with people in industries, you'll see it all around. Healthcare is an easy one. I flew next to a doctor. If anybody talks with doctors, this guy was just complaining about how horrible, he blamed Obamacare. So it's Obamacare is all the evil, but the world of doctors is different, and he's very angry about it. Barnes & Noble. Do you know that Barnes & Noble is on the Forbes list to be dead in a year? This one we see in academia. This is open source publishing. So publishing companies are tremendously threatened. This is a fascinating one. I'll give you the very quick version. Academics are realizing that we do all the work for the editorial boards, for the editing and the reviewing. We do it for free. We send it to journals, and journals make money. And then they restrict access to the information, so you have to pay. So there was a movement in Europe by, I believe, a mathematician who had a petition against Elsevier and got all of these people to sign it. There's this campaign attacking Elsevier in Europe. And the idea is, we don't buy that model. So what the mathematicians did is they went off and started their own journal, open source. We already do the reviewing, we already do the editing, so we control it. We don't need the publishers, because I think it's Scribus, I don't know how to say this, and some other sources, we don't need formatting. So just when you get your paper accepted, put it in the right form, we post it up and anybody can have it. So this is a major transformation. This is complexity, driving changes and destroying industries, and very quickly. I mean, we've been saying for a long time the world's changing rapidly, and it is. It is changing at a faster pace, and I'm a person who's been watching this, and I think about this, and I tend not to dramatize. I think it's increasing in the last couple years. I have seen change on a level I've never seen before. Okay, so if this doesn't do it for you, we in academia will really relate to the next one. This is the MOOCs. Now, here's what's funny. So MOOCs are the massive open online courses. They are the threat to higher ed. Here's what's funny. I go to search for some images. Look at these images. I was stunned when I saw them. And in fact, I only pulled some. I could have had a whole presentation of scary images of MOOCs. I mean, I don't know if you can see this one over here. Look at that evil monster. So we in academia are unbelievably threatened by this. This is something we can't control. It is shifting the very foundations of what we know and what we do, and it's happening quickly. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is it's gotta be short, because we don't have much time. Do we have to stop at 9:30?
40.
Or 10, 40? So I've got till 40? Okay. So, and that's 10, sorry. It's in Nebraska. Maybe I'm in Nebraska, so I see the Husker shirt. This is Nebraska time. I'm right back home.
Still an hour to go.
That's right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about a research program, but it's not even 100,000-foot level. It's probably 300, 500, I don't know. We have so much we could tell you, so much more. So I'm just going to give you a very, very high-level overview. Complexity leadership assumes that complexity can't be managed. So we enter from this idea. And that managerial models of leadership that focus on hierarchy and control aren't sufficient for dealing with the world of complexity. So we need a different assumption. And our traditional leadership language doesn't let us see it. And I will tell you, I was trying. In the late 90s, I was really trying hard to use traditional ways and thinking about relational to get to this. I couldn't get to it. The only way you can get to it is by putting on a different lens. So think about it this way. If you go to a 3D movie and you don't have the 3D glasses, what do you see? You see a blur, fuzzy images, you don't see the depth. So essentially what complexity does is help us put on the 3D glasses. Doesn't mean we can't see it without, we can, we just don't see it the same way. It's a very different story. And it doesn't mean that everything is 3D either. So I don't want to say that we have to do this for everything. I'm saying it's a certain lens. So what we did is we started with the conceptual work. And this took us a long time because complexity is a deep field in the sciences, and it was a struggle to figure out how to apply it. And on the business side, they come at it from the standpoint of self-organization, self-organizing systems. So my colleague is an American school complexity theorist. I then discovered there's a European school, but he was very into biology. And so he would use ants and bees. Ants don't have centralized control. We talk about the queen and the ants and the bees, but they aren't really queens. They are not centralized command. They have systems that operate based on interdependence and simple rules, and they're interacting. It's like swarming birds. So we can do that, and we can do it for Al-Qaeda. We can do it for the economic crisis, the Egyptian revolution, but the challenge is how do we do that in business contexts? Because in business, we have hierarchical organizations. So it took us a long time, and it was 2007 when we finally figured out how to pull these pieces together, and that was the complexity leadership framework. So at that point, I had a colleague calling me saying, we need to write a book. And I said, nope, we need to go collect data. I said, I'm not doing anything more without data. We've been armchair theorizing. We now need to figure out how this works. So we began an empirical research program, and this thing really snowballed. We didn't expect it to snowball like this. We started in a bank, and the story of how we got to the bank, I was doing a call for Plexus Institute. Russ and I were doing a webinar. And after we were done talking, this was probably 2007, 2008, this guy comes on, and he says, well, at the place where I work, this is how I use Russ and Mary's theory. And I was like, whoa, who is this guy? He gets it and he knows how to use it? So his name was Michael Arena, and he was an executive at Bank of America. So Michael, and I said to Russ, do you know him? He said, I've met him. I said, call him, we need to talk with him. So we began to partner with Michael. And with Michael, we began a research program. And what was fascinating is he has a Ph.D., but he works in industry. So he gets the research side, but he's a practitioner. He stayed on our team the whole time. In fact, we went to the next site, and he coded the data. We went to the third site. He actually went and interviewed with us. So here we have a high-level practitioner as part of our core research team. And what he did is if we were starting to get off track, he'd say, no way. You know, this is how it really works. He would tell us the words to use in the appropriate language or context for business. So here we have an academic, very academically rigorous developed theory with the practice embedded from the very beginning. We also got a grant from Booz Allen Hamilton to study leadership and adaptability in the healthcare industry. So we did that for a couple of years. So we ended up with a whole bunch of organizations and some dissertations along the way. So here is the overview of the sites. Don't have time to go into this. It just gives you a sense of how much data we have. Each of these has multiple papers that can come out of them. We used an abductive approach, theoretical sampling, and coding processes according to qualitative methods. I had to teach myself to be a qualitative researcher, which was a whole other journey in and of itself. So I had to completely transform my training, which was not easy. Okay, so here are our findings. Now, these are so high level, but I have some practical slides I want to show you at the end that give you just a little glimmer of what we're excited about. So much depth that could go under this. Here's the first thing. If I have to describe in all of the richness and all of the detail of everything we found, one of the most important takeaways for me was what does it mean to say that we are in complexity? So we talk about this all the time, right? But what does it really mean in a business organization to be in complexity? So here's what our data told us. Our data told us that being in complexity is, we use the term conflicting constraint. It's described as a conflicting constraint. So a conflicting constraint is this. You have a pressure from the environment that's causing you to have to do something differently. You cannot use old methods to solve this. So in Heifetz's term, Ron Heifetz's model of leadership, this is an adaptive challenge. Okay, so pressure from the environment to have to do something differently, there's not a known solution. That pressure is causing you to have to create new partnerships. So you have to work with people you haven't worked with before. There are new interdependencies. With these new partnerships, people have different needs. So with the interdependencies, everybody comes with a different need, a different worldview, a different desire, heterogeneity. And there's such interdependency that even though you would want to quit, you can't. Because complexity is not fun. For me, it is. For some people, they don't like complexity. I love it. But for some people, they don't. It's not fun. And so the interdependency forces you to have to work through it. You have no choice. All right, so that's what it means to be in complexity in organizations. And the other thing that we discovered in this, Russ had the theory that what we would have to do is create organizations as complex adaptive systems. So we go in as managers and we create the conditions. We found very clearly that was wrong. Complexity is too hard to do by just creating conditions. So where it comes from is the environment. Now it can be an internal or an external environment, but the pressures come. So complexity comes from pressures. Okay, now here's finding number 2. Complexity requires an adaptive response. Bill McKelvey and Max Boiseau had been talking about this for a while. They wrote a beautiful paper in AMR in 2010 that helped us see this. It's the law of requisite complexity. It says it takes complexity to beat complexity. So if you have complexity, you have to respond with complexity. Sorry, I've got stuff in my throat. So what that means is that using this picture over here, if there's complexity in the environment, you have to respond in the appropriate regime. All right? But here's the problem. What managers do is they respond with order. We saw this over and over and over again. When complexity comes in, the natural tendency, the reaction is to respond with an ordered response. And an ordered response is not the appropriate level of complexity to deal with complexity. This is where it would take more time to explain. I hope you get the general idea. A complexity response is one that engages interaction. It engages the tensions. It plays in tensions. It plays off of the heterogeneity. So there's a lot of, if you think creativity, there's a lot of creativity and innovation, but there's more to it than that. All right, so what happens is when they do this, when managers respond with order, and what order looks like is standardization, alignment, vision, top-down vision that gets everybody thinking the same way, one direction, tools, procedures, control, all of that is an ordered response. It's not that it's wrong, it's just not right for complexity. And so what it does is it drives out the adaptive dynamics. So if we think about emergence, and these things are little complex adaptive systems, it wipes out the emergence. It wipes out the adaptive dynamics that you need for complexity. This is the response that predominant leadership approaches are telling us to do. So here's the real problem. I've kind of come around to another warning label. Warning, what you've been taught about leadership may be harmful to organizational health. So what managers do is they turn to what they're taught. And it's not just managers, it's the employees. Because employees don't like the ambiguity, the lack of direction. So employees pressure the organization and they pressure the managers, take care of it, take care of us, control this. So it's all throughout the organization, this pressure to go to order. Wrong response. Okay, so in our data, traditional leadership looks like this. There are pressures on the system, and that comes from complexity in the environment. There's a desire for control, again, not only by managers, by employees. So I don't want to just scapegoat the managers here. This is everybody. We've all been taught this. And so what they do is they go to traditional leadership. And what that does is tighten the administrative function in the organization. And that creates more bureaucratization, and it stifles adaptive dynamics. Okay, so that's a core part of the story. If you get the basic idea, we have richness around it I can't go into. So this is going to blow your mind a little bit. And I ask you to let yourselves go and just try to take a little bit of a journey here with me, because this would require a lot more time to really set up, but I'm going to attempt it and hope that you can stay with me. So now what we need to do is figure out, and we started here from the beginning. If we know that we have complex environments, then what we know is in complex environments, we need complex adaptive systems. So we need the organization to be a complex adaptive system. We started with all the wrong assumptions. I think we now have the right understanding of this, another story in and of itself. But what we've discovered along the way is that organizations are probably not naturally complex adaptive systems. Rather, they're complex recursive systems. They want to pull back to equilibrium. And so there's a huge, huge tendency in organizations to go to equilibrium, to go to status quo. And what we have to do is figure out how can we make them adaptive. All right, so now we've got a systems approach. This is not going to get to the individual level. We have it, but we can't do it here. This is a macro level systems approach view of leadership. In organizations, we have two major kinds of systems. We have the entrepreneurial system, and we have the administrative system. The entrepreneurial is responsible for innovation, adaptability, learning, growth. All organizations start out entrepreneurial. They all start out as a small business entrepreneurial organization. We also have the administrative system, and that's responsible for results. So this is to convert all of these ideas into products that bring money and sustain the viability of the organization. So once an entrepreneurial firm does the IPO and becomes an organization, they take on the administrative system. And from that point forward, we have a major battle at play. The battle between the entrepreneurial and the administrative. What do you think wins out? In almost every case, the administrative wins out. So here's a perfect example, Google. Google's a great example of this. What do they struggle with? They struggle with trying to stay entrepreneurial and not letting the administrative take over. So we see the story play out over and over again. All right, both of these play an important role. When we started our work, complexity would tell us we only care about the bottom up. What we discovered in our work, the top down is critical. You have to have it. The administrative plays an essential role, and it's in the interaction between these and the dynamic tension between these two systems where we get the sweet spot. This is where things really happen. This is our major discovery right here, that what we haven't known about or haven't understood is that there's also a thing called an adaptive system. And the adaptive system operates in the interface between these other two. And what it does is it helps take the stuff that's growing and emerging and developing in the entrepreneurial system and feed it into the administrative. It also helps protect the entrepreneurial from the stifling control preferences of the administrative. So because we don't know about this, we haven't been intentional about designing adaptive systems. We've understood the entrepreneurial, and we've understood the administrative. We've been missing the adaptive. The adaptive is responsible for emergence because organizations to survive, to be healthy, have to have emergence. So it's keeping an eye on emergence. How do we fuel it? How do we feed it? How do we contain it? There's a containing element as well. This isn't something running out of control. This is a process of trying to interact with this complex dynamic. When things make it into the administrative system, it gets institutionalized back. It creates a phase transition and a new order for the organization. So emergence happens when you get institutionalization. This is a product or service that becomes something formal in the organization. And then we also have to have this other piece, which is renewal. And renewal is feeding and supporting the adaptive system. This is missing. This is so missing. And I'll tell you that what I've done is I teach this or talk about this. There's a brick wall. If you can imagine a brick wall right here. It's a brick wall at the edge of administrative. My colleague Michael calls it the wall of resistance. It's so hard to get things into the administrative system in many organizations. And so we need to make sure that we deal with that brick wall. And that's what adaptive does. Okay, this is one that I can't get into very much, but I want to show you, just so you know, that there's more richness around what happens in this. So we understand what happens in these systems now. And we know what leaders do. We know what the leadership attributes and the leadership profiles are of people in these systems. And that's where we're going with it. Okay? Essentially, in entrepreneurial, it's a lot of creativity. Then in the adaptive, it's a lot of linking up and networking and brokering. And in the administrative, it's scaling. But it's scaling in a way that's not stifling. Okay. I have enough time to conclude. I want to show you these slides. 2 minutes? Okay. I want to show you the adaptive system in an organization. Jack Welch at GE. What do we know about Jack Welch? In 1980, revenues were $25 billion. They went to $129 billion, 21% per year at stock return, all of the numbers. We know the numbers. Okay? We also know that GE tried to teach this, and that they were grooming CEOs, and that they thought they knew what they were doing, right? So if they thought they knew what they were doing and what Jack Welch was doing, they would have been able to replicate it. Did they replicate it? No. Only 2 of the 34 GE-trained executives who became CEOs get star ratings. Only 3 of 34 show untarnished stock gains. 17 of 34 performed worse than the S&P. And of those, only Bossity and McNerney show strong performance. None as good as Welch. What does that tell us? Here's what Welch did. Welch created a complex adaptive system. But what do people think he did? Execution. They think he did execution. Even he thought he did execution. He didn't know what he was doing exactly. He knew, but he couldn't explain it. And implicit knowledge, but tacit, but not explicit. And it kills the entrepreneurial system. Now, what evidence do we have for that? 3M under McNerney. What a disaster. He went in using the GE model. He tried to implement all of the execution stuff, and he nearly destroyed the company. So 3M has been suffering ever since and trying to regain their innovation and their competitive edge. Okay, now why did they think it was execution? This is the most fascinating part. Because Welch was the adaptive system. He was an adaptive leader. We started hating the hero leader model. I now believe in it. I got told a year ago, you got to drop that hero leader problem. It's true. He was a hero leader. He was able to keep that system in place, but it was him. And we've been asked, a year ago we were asked by Brad Anderson, who's the retired CEO of Best Buy, which is now dying. And he said he and Jack Welch are totally frustrated because they can't figure out why the organization didn't survive after they left it. It's because it was an adaptive leader and not an adaptive system. We see the same thing. I know this now from reading the biography. Steve Jobs, amazing. If you want to know what an adaptive leader is, go read that biography. Now, yeah, he was a jerk. I like that came across in the story. But he was amazing in reinventing the company, right? He did complexity. But again, it was him. He kept hoping that it was in the culture, but it's not. The one that we think is doing it is IBM. IBM, with their transition to the smarter planet, they've transformed themselves multiple times, and we also know that they know complexity. So our next step is to get into IBM and see if they have actually developed this in a system versus a leader. Okay. You see that there's a lot. So that's my slides. I got through it. Conclusion, we don't need to worry about it. You get the idea. I will wrap.
Well, these are certainly provocative ideas, and unfortunately, we're not going to have a lot of time for questions, but we can take a few questions. So who would like to ask the first question? Does this make any sense to you, Mary?
I think it's a marvelous presentation, and I was trying to be adaptive to my experiences in management. And I use different words, but I'm in total agreement with the essence of your presentation. It's outstanding.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay. Question? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent too, but it really resonated with me. So, to me, it was in some ways very intuitive. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on two people, the woman at Yahoo, whose name I can't remember,
Marissa
and the
Mayer.
Pope. They both have really interesting challenges. So how are they going to succeed?
So Marissa Mayer has been given a lot of grief about calling people back into the office. Boy, we could go into a lot of gender stuff here. I'm going to give you my short version of this. I think it's really unfair that she's being attacked for this, and it's because she's a woman. If it had been a man, they would never even have addressed the issue. And actually, the people who are attacking are the women. They're holding her up as the role model for women everywhere, and I think all of that is just a red herring. I think she's right, and that they need to pull people back in. Because if we're talking about the need to have an adaptive organization, you need the complex interactions. You need the interactive dynamic. You need the surprise and the spontaneity. So I think that it's right, what she's doing. She has a really tough road ahead of her because she's got to take an organization that had gone too administrative, too bureaucratic, and try to create it into a complex adaptive system.
But was it more complex when people were able to work in different ways and with different...
They weren't, though. They weren't really interacting. I think what she wants to try to do is get them back together and really interacting more. I think people were at home, and there are other issues around this, and that they weren't really performing, and they weren't really engaging. So,
Since there's a lot of interest in questions, Vania, I'm going to ask you to use your sprinter role in moving the microphone to people, and I'm going to ask all of you to make, not a 7-part question, but a pointed, one question.
I'll try to answer quickly.
If you give pointed questions, pointed answers, we'll try to get a few more. Okay, come on.
Really quickly, where can I get more information? Because this is just like scratching the surface. But
I
I find
know.
it fascinating.
So we're in the process of writing a book. In fact, I just came from Minneapolis. It's the pressure I have in my own field. Do I try to publish this in the academic journals? Right now, that's going to take it too traditional, and it's not going to get the story out there. So we're working on a book that will be for practitioners, and I'm working with Michael. He's co-authoring with me, and then we have a group of consultant practitioners who are part of our team, and they're going to put together a handbook. So we'll have a field guide that accomplishes it. That should be out in a year, we hope.
Major Ortega. Ma'am, how do you account for time in the business world? Because you have an adaptive system does emerge, and within the systems and other actors and influence to grow, to make that link. And in the business world, in our Western philosophy, we want it today versus time.
What I have discovered in working in this is that what the adaptive leaders do is they protect the place that's doing the emergence. They hold people off. So they try to keep that pressure of time away from it so that there's enough time. Now, it can't be too little, can't be too much. It's got to be the right amount of time. But you have to protect that so that things can incubate and reach a level that they can be formed enough to then bring it out. If you bring it out too early, it'll get killed. So we're studying that. We have that information as well. And timing also is critically important. So how you do things timing-wise.
Hi, I work in the libraries, and this system actually would be perfect with all the changes that are going on.
Yes.
Will we be able to get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Yes, I can leave that.
Okay.
Yes, next. Right here.
Hi, my name is Lisa. What I coming to the understanding of all this is that we're trying to bring back the people to become people again.
Yes.
And we're trying to get them all together so we can interact. But the society and the way the world is going today is all separation. Let's go through the internet. Let's talk away. Even with children as young as 3 years old. And so what seems to me is that we're realizing society has become so separated in mind that no longer we know how to interact. And this is one way of bringing it right back in, like the Googles.
So I'm going to disagree with that slightly because I think we're in an age of interaction and connectivity like we've never been in. It's a different kind of interaction, and maybe we don't recognize it as the way we did it, but all of this networking and the social networking and the information that's available out there, that's what's driving a lot of the complexity. So I don't think that we're not interacting. I think we're interacting like crazy.
Okay, right here.
Man, you did enough to leave us with a bug, and that's fantastic on your presentation. The question is, have you dealt with chaos theory? A lot of what I was looking at is very similar to chaos, organized chaos theory.
Yeah.
Is there any type of relationship?
Yes. The answer is yes. There's chaos theory, there's complexity theory. None of them agree with anybody on anything. It's a big mess. So what we've done is kind of just plowed forward in what we can do to apply to the organization. But yes, there's a lot of chaos theory involved. And Bill is a chaos theory, my co-author, the chaos theory person.
Okay, so you've described the process and the system. So how do we teach it for outcomes?
Yes. Well, we think a little bit differently about outcomes. I think we think about emergence and how things can emerge. We have a general idea of what an outcome would be, but we let things emerge to become that outcome. And I have stories I could tell on that, but I don't have time. How do we teach it? That's where we need to get the material out there. So I think if we can get the book and the field guide out, people will have the resources. And the nice thing about the group of practitioners and consultants I'm working with is they have PhDs, they're working in practice in an industry, and they know how to get the materials out there. And then we'll do some educational side pieces as well.
Two more questions, one from here, one from here. Dr. Uhl-Bien has, yeah, the back, over there. Run, come on. 12 years old.
I'm so sorry we had to do this so quickly.
I have a question about the technology in the environment and the relation of that to offshoreness. In 1918, the technology, electrical into electronics, toward the atomic age, all of these mergers. Is there anything similar now, the technology side of the complexity?
Technology is a large driver behind this. I mean, it's the social networking technology, it's the information technology, it's the internet, it's the fact that we're so connected, interconnected. I mean, my husband was telling me when I get to the hotel last night about Cyprus. And so then I turn on the news and everybody's worried about Cyprus and how it's going to affect us here. I mean, if that's not interconnected, I don't know what is. So I think technology has really been fueling it. Technology is what's allowing things like the MOOCs to happen. It's allowing the different kind of publishing. Technology is what's providing information to people in China, and they're pressuring their leaders to be more transparent and to change society. So I think it's a key driver, and there are many elements of it that I don't even know about, I'm sure.
As we speak, the City Council of Sweetwater is meeting and saying, how will Cyprus impact our next election?
Yeah.
What are the common traits of these adaptive leaders?
Where's that coming from?
So what they do is they link up. They provide so they're watching for things to foster interconnectivity and create linkages. So they're looking to see who's poised that I can link these things up, and when they come together, they'll create something exciting. They provide sponsorship, and they have a lot of networking ability. So this is, I think, the reason we're studying networking so much. They help the materials get into the administrative system, so they have political skills. They know how to protect the innovation and protect the innovators, and they're really tough. They're really, really resilient. Because the other story I will tell you is, for most people, this is not a fun, well, it's fun, but organizations are so against it that you have to have a lot of energy, tenacity, resilience to be able to stay in it. It drains you of energy because our systems are not set up for it.
I mean, we're done?
You can
I
add.
don't think we're done. Go ahead.
Just a follow-up to that is ethics and integrity and decision-making
Yes, absolutely, because there are a lot of ethical elements around this. I mean, the simple answer is I think the systems help create more ethics by making information more transparent and moving us away from silence kinds of environments, bureaucratic, that stifle things. But there also are ethical decisions that we have to make in how we deal with people in this, because complexity can be stressful. It can really be tiring. If we raise expectations to get them to complexity in organizations that are not complex, we put people at risk. It's like the raising the expectations of empowerment, and then if you leave, they're left stuck there out in the open. So there are a lot of ethical issues involved.
We're going to have to stop because Professor Uhl-Bien has other things to do. I'm sure if you're really fast, for instance, our friend, you can run over here and at least say hello. She will be around for a few more minutes before our next. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.